Welcome to the Two Marketing Moms podcast.
Two women with 50 years plus of marketing
Integrity
experience.
and culture are extremely important.
You can still say, I don't know.
Stop multitasking and be present in the
Moms
moment.
have balls, big time.
Welcome to the Two Marketing Moms podcast. We are two women with more than 50 years of marketing and advertising experience between us, and we want to talk about the struggles, the fails, and the wins that we experienced while building our careers, being a boss, juggling work and a home life, and arguably the hardest and yet most fulfilling job, being a mom. This podcast was created for marketing and advertising professionals, especially the up-and-coming marketing stars of the future. We hope these tips, tricks, and advice will help you navigate work and life and get ahead.
Welcome to Two Marketing Moms with Kelly Callahan Poe and Julia McDowell. Today we have special guest Kelly Campbell. Kelly Campbell is a conscious leadership coach helping creative media and technology leaders transform their lives and their advertising agencies. She is the former owner of a cause marketing agency. She's going to tell that story today, which has her 6 P's framework focusing on personal development, purpose, positioning, people, pipeline, and profitability. She is also the co-founder of Consciousness Leaders, a globally curated and diverse collective of conscious leadership experts helping organizations evolve meaningfully. She's a keynote speaker on leadership, digital marketing, and agency growth conferences across the country. And she's been featured in the New York Times, Women Entrepreneur, The Startup on Medium, and Forbes.com, for which she's most recently become a member of the Forbes Business Council. She's currently authoring her first book. Maybe she'll tell us a little bit about it today on redefining what it means to be a leader. She's the host of Thrive, Your Agency Resource, a bi-weekly video podcast sponsored by Workamajig that helps agency owners navigate personal and professional growth. Quite a mouthful, Kelly. You've got quite a resume. It's very impressive. Wow. I first learned about you on LinkedIn, and we talked about this a little bit at Client Con, and you had done a video about masculine versus feminine energy, and I was mesmerized, and all these lights were going off in my head. And so I want to talk a little bit about that today. But before we do that, I want to start asking some questions about how you started. A lot of our listeners are either in college or, just coming out of college and starting in the work world. And so you've had an interesting path. And I want to hear a little bit about, how you started a cause marketing firm in New York at a very young age and ultimately sold it 14 years later and decided to refocus on coaching. Can you talk to us a little bit about, what were the lessons learned from that experience and how that path kind of went for you?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here because we're talking about all my favorite things. So thank you for indulging me. When I graduated college, I got a really small a job doing like graphic design and things like that for a screen printing company. And then within a few months, there was the large corporation that came in and needed a logo and some t-shirts made for their Palm Pilot application. That's how far back we're going.
Ooh.
So
I had a Palm Pilot.
So did I. So I did, I really like owned that project because it was the first time I was actually doing real design work, right? And they loved it so much that they actually offered me a job. And so I went directly from this small little screen printing company, like rolling in at 11 o'clock in the morning and kind of like super flexible, still in kind of college mode, and immediately thrown into this super toxic environment that I had never really had any resonance with before. So it was very male dominant. It was financial services and then like a technology spinoff. It was not just financial services, but a hedge fund. So like very male dominant. The workplace was not diverse whatsoever. There was a ton of misogyny. I mean, it was just like everything you could possibly imagine. So this young, at that point, 21-year-old gay woman walks in and it was just oil and water, right? So I didn't stay there very long, but what I did, not consciously at the time, but I kind of picked up on how they were operating, meaning that there were a ton of cooks in the kitchen. They were not valuing their people. It was 100% about profits over the people. And so as I was starting to kind of absorb all of that and realize how it was impacting me as an employee, I was like, this can't be that hard. I've got to be able to do this better than this is being done. And so, yeah, I was just kind of brazen. I didn't know any better. And at 22, I kind of just gave notice and started my own company. And I thought, why don't I start a company that I would actually want to be an employee of? And I think that's where the first sort of um, thoughts or maybe just like leaning into what does conscious leadership even mean? What does that look like? Not that I used those words back then, but in retrospect, that's what it was. I wanted to create a company consciously where it was the antithesis of my experience.
Can you dig a little bit deeper about conscious leadership and what that means to you and how that's
Yeah.
become kind of the core of your focus in your coaching business?
Yeah, sure. And then I can get back to kind of some of the lessons that
Yeah.
you were talking about, because I know that's really important, especially for your audience. Conscious leadership to me is about being self-aware, number one. Number two, it's about being a contributor to things outside of yourself. So that means the people that are on your team, the community in which your organization is a part of, the industry or the domain that you're a part of, and then larger, from a larger perspective, your impact on the planet. So it's like first the self, then others, then planet. All of that sort of like spun up in a little, mixed up in a little bowl is essentially what conscious leadership is, right? Um, so people get really hung up on the fact that there might be some like spiritual aspect to it, or there might be some other aspect to it that they can't quite put their finger on, because consciousness in general is like kind of this ethereal thing that we don't really know all how to define. But that's what it means. It means being aware of yourself, what your impact is on other people and your impact on the earth. That's it.
Very simple.
Sustainability, and yeah, like keep it simple, because otherwise people don't retain it, right? So you've got to keep the message simple. And
Got
as
it.
marketers, we know that. Yeah.
Do you want
I
to go
can
back
rela-
to, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just gonna say I can totally relate to some of your path, like a couple
Most
years
women
ago.
can.
Yeah, when I started my agency several years ago, almost 4 years ago now, it was me wanting to create something that was from my core coming out, and developing those values and living those values, because I didn't want anyone else to dictate them to me.
Right. So that's sort of like a good segue for a lot of these lessons that I learned over the 14 years of having the cause marketing firm, where I did do exactly that, right? Like I developed a culture, sort of unbeknownst to me, or maybe naturally, organically, where I did value my people. I mean, I don't have children, so my team members were like my kids. I mean, I like really felt this supreme like maternal instinct to make sure that they were well supported and taken care of, all of these things. So the lessons that I learned from that whole time, I mean, were many. I'll try to boil it down to like 5 for you, and I'll go real quick with them. But there were so many. First of all, I think one of the most important ones was that I do not have to know everything or do everything myself. What I realized in retrospect as a coach was that what I was doing in the early days was actually disempowering my people. If I felt like I had to do everything myself, what that actually communicated to them was that I didn't trust them to do it. So it actually disempowered them, which is the opposite of what I wanted to do. My whole leadership journey was about empowering other people and having them sort of surpass my legacy, right? So I was acting in a way that was against what my values were. Another thing was that I had this belief, for whatever reason, that I had to work hard in order to earn success. And what that is false. And it's a totally self-limiting belief, because it's not true. You don't have to work hard to be successful. And it's not that I don't work hard now as a coach or a consultant. It's just that I work a lot smarter, right? I have more passive income streams. I value my time differently than I did back then. Another one is that over the course of that 14 years, I learned how to trust my intuition. I wish I had learned that earlier on, because, imposter syndrome is real. right? And like, you actually do know the answers, but we are, raised in a society where, especially as women, we're taught sometimes, either directly or inadvertently, that we don't know the answers, that we don't know what we're doing, that there's a different way or a better way to do it than the way that we believe. And our intuition is a really powerful thing. I think so much so that we can use it to our advantage. Another one, which we're definitely going to touch on today, is that I can actually operate in such a way where I balance feminine and masculine aspects, that I don't have to embody these masculine aspects because I'm in like a male dominant field, right? And I think, Julia, you had some relationship or some question about that. And I guess we'll get into that later.
Yeah.
And then I think the last one, which has really been sort of pervasive since it's become sort of a mantra, is the idea of essentialism. So for me, if it's not a definite yes, it's a definite no. It makes my life and my decision making so much easier. I'm a pretty decisive person to begin with. I don't really waffle back and forth, but trusting my intuition and this idea or theory of essentialism in combination has been like very, very powerful. So even that, the application of that is like, when a new client comes in, I'm within 5 minutes. For me, I already know if it's not a definite yes, it's a definite no. And no for me just means that I'm going to refer them to someone else who might be able to help them. So lots and lots and lots of lessons, but I would say
You just dropped like a bomb on this podcast. Like, I wrote down all those 5 because it's like therapy. It's like workplace therapy. Like the last one, Kelly, I feel like is for you. We were just talking about like, simplifying our lives, working smarter, not harder, and essentialism, I think could do both of us.
So
really
that was
well.
actually a book that I read. It was literally called Essentialism. I think Greg McKeown is the author. Yeah. And the big takeaway from that, I do, recommend that you buy the book, but the big takeaway is just, if it's not a definite yes, it's a definite no. And it just makes everything like, you can just relax after that.
I know. Yeah.
Like, gets rid of all that anxiety.
If I had thought of that in my 20s, I would have saved myself a lot of dating time. Bygones. That's just wonderful. And wow. I'm not quite sure where to go from there, because you gave some really great stuff there. I want to move into the masculine and feminine energy, because I think that's where we all can resonate most. I mean, it's funny because literally Julie and I, 5 minutes before this call, we're talking about some of these very things and simplifying the things that we do on a regular basis and not recreating the wheel and streamlining and working, not working harder, but working smarter. So all those things literally kind of came out of our mouths as if it were like a recent aha moment. But that's a lot of the things that COVID did to us. You're working longer hours, surprisingly, in spite of not having that commute. It makes it easier to work, to pop out of bed and to work longer. And so that efficiency component is so important. So I want to go over to your Partner Don't Pitch PDF that you have.
The download. Yeah.
Have distributed. And it has and I'm going to put this for people who are looking at the YouTube video. Not everyone can see it, obviously, on the podcast, but maybe you can explain a little bit your new Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, masculine, feminine way of doing things, which is, a concept that's been talked about in relationships, but not so much in business.
Yeah. And this is why I say I have no competitors, because nobody's talking about business development from the standpoint of masculine and feminine energy, but we really should be, because this is, if you want, I'm not a big fan of like silver bullet, secret sauce kind of stuff, but this is kind of it. And it's really interesting. So when you're talking about feminine and masculine energy, the first thing to know is that we're not talking about gender at all. What we're talking about is an energy or an aspect, right? So you have being versus doing. So being would be, from a Buddhist perspective, would be associated with more of like a feminine, again, not women, but like feminine energy. More, I'll use like a bunch of different words to give you different contexts, but feminine energy would be more like receptive energy, reflective, collaborative. Talk about collaboration versus winning. The idea of collaborating with other people and having a shared experience versus the masculine energy, which would be more associated with winning or individualism, or sort of like, I don't know if I want to say dominance yet, but like the idea of like I win versus we collaborate and like create something together, right?
Yeah.
So feminine energy would also be generative, creative. Masculine energy would be more like execution. So if you think about this, let's use like a marketing agency, a marketing firm, just to kind of bring it back to some relevance here. If you think about it from a biological standpoint, you need masculine and feminine biology to create life, right? Super simple concept. In a marketing agency, you need strategy and execution to create a good product, to create something that's effective, to birth something that's going to work in the world, right? You need the thinking and the doing, the being and the doing. You start to get into some territory where there's like really clear delineation between these things, where you get into the I versus the we. And I think this, if we don't want to use feminine and masculine because it's too triggering for people, or there are some men who don't want to have like any association with like feminine aspects, if that's the case, then we can literally boil it down to like we versus I. This is why female leaders, right? And this is proven, this is not my opinion. Female leaders are more generative, they're more inclusive, they are more effective leaders by and large, right? That's not, I mean, that's a blanket statement, but the way that they operate, the way that they lead is different if they are embodying these feminine aspects. That's not to say that we don't have male leaders who don't embody feminine aspects. We certainly do. And by the way, those are the most effective male leaders. So it's this idea of what is good for me versus what is good for all of us, right? Dan Price from Gravity Payments is a great example of a male leader, a white male leader, who really embodies this like feminine aspect. When he changed the structure of his company so that everyone had a $70,000 starting salary, including himself, that's a very collaborative, generative, equitable mindset, right? And then he took the action to actually put that into place. So yeah, there are definitely people who do that, who are not necessarily women, but by and large, women embody these things. And again, you need both. So I'm not saying, this is not to say that women are better and men aren't, or women are more effective and men are less effective. What I'm saying is you definitely need both, right? I happen to work with a lot of agency owners, agency leadership teams that are couples, right? And so what's interesting is the couples could be married heterosexual couples. They could be same-sex partners, they could be husband and husband, wife and wife, whatever the case may be. But a lot of partners somehow make their way to me. I don't know if it's because I have a more therapeutic spin to my work or whatever it is. But I realize that what makes those companies so successful is that those partnerships are really strong. And if you actually look at the aspects of each of those partners, one is definitely a little bit more feminine and one is a little bit more masculine in terms of being really great and having great strength in the being side, and the other one having a lot of strength in the doing side. So
I totally believe that.
Yeah.
My husband, at the beginning of setting up my business, was very involved in creating the brand, and I actually, like, what I thought, from how you break out the being, doing, collaborate, winning, where I thought I would have landed and where he landed was actually completely opposite.
Mm-hmm.
weirdly enough, he was being more of a collaborator and I was being more of a winner. And he was being more we and I was being more I. And so I feel like this is such a good gut check to me. Like when I downloaded this from your website, I marinated on the being versus doing, because lately I've just been the doing. And I realize it's just like such a good check for me. Like I realize I have to open up space to do the being, because my clients appreciate both. So I wonder, like, so when you bring this concept to people when you're coaching, like, are people open to it? Does it take them a while to really understand, catch on, buy in?
No, I would say by and large, no, because one of the big pain points for agency owners, marketing agency owners, marketing firm owners, is bringing in new business, right? So if I'm saying, hey, you've been doing whatever you've been doing for X number of years, and you know how it's going, and I'm providing a different approach, they tend to be pretty open to it.
Yeah,
right?
they want it, they need it.
The other thing is that what I'm saying here, just like you said, this is brand new information to you, but it also makes a ton of sense. I'm not saying something here that's like irrational, right?
Yeah, totally.
So I think the combination of that, and when I'm talking about business development in these contexts, we're talking about making small changes to, let's say, the order of their proposals, or the verbiage inside, the language inside of their proposals, or maybe the positioning statements on their websites. We're not talking about like reinventing the entire wheel. We're just talking about modifying it in such a way so that it's less about I and more about we, the collective we, meaning the prospect and the organization, showing that partnership right up front, right? So inside of that PDF that you're referencing, there's an entire section about how to actually create your what do I call it? A connection deck, right? So there's a whole section there, and then there's, on that same page where you download it, there's a whole video that kind of takes you through these like 10 slide connection deck. And it just gives you a different framework to actually put these things together and put them in front of your prospects. And it does all of the things that we've been talking about. It shows that you're more collaborative. It shows that you're listening more. It shows that listening is probably one of the most important things, right? It shows that you care. It shows that you're curious. It shows that you are invested from the beginning. All of that makes a lot of sense in business development, because organizations don't do business with organizations. People do business with people. So if I want to do business with you, I want to really feel like you understand me, right? Like you are listening to me, you value me, you see me, you hear me. And if you are able to do that in such a way where you repeat back to me what I've said, but in your own words, or even in my own words, and then we start to have a dialogue, the trust gets developed real quick that way, right? And that's what business development is all about. Getting as quickly as possible from like no relationship to trusted relationship to partnership.
Yep. So, okay. So tell us where we can, all the people listening, where we can get this PDF, because you all need to go get it.
Yeah. So that's just on my website. It's klcampbell.com/guide.
Perfect. Okay. Yes.
Yep.
Everyone needs that.
Yeah.
So, okay. I don't remember where I read or heard this, but you say you have two superpowers, one of which is intent active listening, which I agree is a total superpower. I recently read something that was kind of related. It was a quote: "When we think of listening, we think of focusing on others in order to hear them," which obviously we do all freaking day on Zoom. But the more I learned about it, the more apparent it became that so much of effective listening is actually being aware of yourself, your own tendency, habitual responses, your body language. that draw an emotional response from you, even the environment's company or time of day, that can make your listening power stronger or weaker.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, wow. Okay. How can I be a better listener? I'm on all these meetings. I'm trying to absorb what people are saying,
Right.
what they're trying to give off. So being part of an agency, especially in a client facing role, how can people practice their listening skills, or how do you approach this in your work?
Yeah. So this is a really, really beautiful question. I love this question so much. Because we can really kind of like anchor into a lot of practicality, right?
Yeah.
So all of this comes down to listening to understand versus listening to reply, right? So here again, when we use these words, I'm going to associate the masculine and the feminine with them. So when I listen to understand, that means that I am dialing up my curiosity, right? That's a feminine aspect. When I'm listening to reply, that's a sort of egoic, I'll even use that word, egoic or solution centric, execution focused, masculine aspect, right? So if I'm listening to you, but I'm already formulating my response to you, am I really
Right.
listening to you?
Right.
No. What I'm
Exactly.
doing is I'm formulating in my mind, and this is the first time I'm actually saying it out loud, so I'm like working through it with you. But like as I'm listening to you, if I'm kind of in that masculine mindset, I'm formulating my reply in my mind, which means I'm not entirely listening to you. And what I'm doing is I'm making sure that you come away from the experience thinking that I solved your problem. And that's what I mean by egoic, right? As
Yeah.
opposed to you start talking and I'm literally just dialed in. I am like actively listening. I'm maintaining eye contact. I'm intently listening. What starts to happen naturally is if you shut off that part of your brain where you're starting to think about replying, what happens is your brain, your mind will start questioning things. Well, I wonder what you mean by that. Or like, right, there's going to be
Yeah.
this natural questioning. That's what curiosity is. So what happens is if you start to say something and I say, hey, can I just interrupt for a second? You just said blah, 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 right? Like I repeat back to you what you said. What did you mean by that? Can you tell me a little bit more about why you use that word? Or what does
Yep.
that actually mean at your company? Because at my company means something different. What you're doing is you're now starting to create a dialogue, right? And so what all of this kind of like does is it creates this organic dialogue that builds more trust, all back to what I was saying before. It leads to the other person, in this case being like the prospect or the client, it leads to them being more seen, heard, understood, valued, all
Yeah.
of those good things, right? And do you know what it also helps by natural extension? Closing new business. Right?
Yeah.
So whether you're
Right.
an account director, account manager, and you're like trying to upsell a client, your job in that moment is to really understand from that client, what is the underlying pain point, right? What is the underlying challenge? If they come to you and they say, hey, we need this piece of this functionality built on our website. You're not just an order taker and you say, okay, great,
Right.
right, functionality on website. You ask questions. Well, what's driving that decision? Can you tell me a little bit more about what the process looks like now? We might be able to come up with a solution that's even better than what you're actually dictating that we do. That, by the way, might actually cost them more money, which means that you've done a really good job in terms of
Right.
upselling. And
Right.
and not just for the purpose of profit, but for the purpose of actually meeting their underlying need, right?
Yeah, I
So
think you touched on such a good um outcome of listening, that you can formulate questions, right? Like I've learned over the past like couple years, just that the questions really matter. Having good questions, not like canned questions, but like questions that come out of that
right,
listening.
right. Which is curiosity, which is a feminine
Exactly.
aspect. Yep.
Yeah. So cool.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you used the word practice too. You said, how can we practice?
Yeah. I mean, I don't
It
think
is a
it's something,
practice.
yeah, it's something that you can't like just
You
say,
do
oh
it
yeah,
every day.
I've got it down. Like it has to
Every
be a
day.
conscious practice of doing that every day.
Yep. Yep.
Any other questions, Kelly, for Kelly?
I was just going to say, one of the things that Julie and I have talked about in the past is kind of the older generation above us. I'm older than Julia, but the generation of women above us who really had to more compete with men versus other women. And so they didn't necessarily, that was when I was growing up in my 20s, I had a lot of female bosses who didn't really want to help a girl up because they were having to deal with their own issues with competing with men. But we're in a different place now, and I don't want to pass that on in any way, shape, or form. And so, one of the main reasons we started this podcast is so that we could help other women up and really to help other women not make the same mistakes that we did. And that's why we're saying them out loud. I mean, we actually did an entire episode on failure and what our biggest failures were, and didn't tell all the details, but we told enough to, kind of give people some basic lessons. And we've also done an episode on our top 10 biggest mistakes. So I think a lot of these things are really helpful for, any women on their way up the ladder. We always say it's not a ladder, it's a jungle gym, because you don't always go up. Sometimes you take 2 steps back, and sometimes you go a couple down, and sometimes you just fall off.
That's right. That's right.
So are there any kind of final advice? I think there's 2 pieces, 2 questions that I have is one, what are the biggest questions that you get from advertising agency owners? What is the biggest struggles that, if you're willing to share, that maybe universally agencies are reaching out to you with? And then, kind of how do you address them?
Yeah. So it is an interesting question. Most agency owners are reaching out to agency growth coaches and growth consultants, saying that they have scalability and profitability issues. Okay. And that's fine.
We're like,
right. So that's fine to believe that those are actually your issues. What I have found by and large is that those are not actually the issues. Scalability in and of itself is not an issue. You have to figure out how large your organization, how large you actually want your organization to be, right? And as opposed to this idea that success is tied to headcount or success is tied to revenue, right? Like, what do you actually want? Because when we use metrics like that, those are very masculine metrics. We're not talking at all about the growth of the people that are under our stewardship, right? We're not talking about the impact that we're making, through our clients. And profitability is a lagging indicator, right? It's like stepping on a scale. You don't just step on a scale every single day with the idea that you want to lose weight and just hope that the numbers go down. It's a lagging indicator. You have to take actions in order for those numbers, right, to change. So I think most say that their issues are scalability, people issues sometimes, and profitability. But when I actually dive in and dig underneath, I find that most of them are really, they're operating in a way that's very, very fear-based. And a lot of these fears come from past trauma, past wounding, different experiences or events that have happened in their lives, anywhere from when they were very young all the way through maybe early adulthood, right? So that's kind of the work that I do. And what I mean by that is they question their hiring choices. They question their numbers. They tell themselves that they're not good at the financials. They question if their service offerings are actually as valuable as they can be. They have issues with pricing. I mean, you name it. But
Did you just crawl inside of my head?
Right. But it's the same
You
for
just
everyone.
did that.
Right. This is what I'm saying. It's like, I don't have the magic answer. I'm really good at listening. Everybody has the same issues. It's just like, what is the specific mix for each person?
Yeah,
right? But I could literally say, here are the 20 different things, and you would tell me, oh, I have 16 of those, right?
yeah.
So that's what it is. It all comes down to fear. So once we kind of heal those fears and heal those old wounds or traumas or whatever it might be that are contributing to you being the one holding your agency back, well, then the world is literally your oyster.
I love that. Well, I think we're going to end there. We appreciate your time, Kelly, and we look forward to chatting you again. And we both be maybe making appointments with you.
Okay.
Oh
Sounds
my
good.
gosh, Kelly, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me on.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you liked what you heard, please leave us a podcast review or send us a message at twomarketingmoms.com and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time.